Good to see you again on our channel. Even at the age of 75, the comments of a cultural critic shake the tranquil sanctuary of Bob Dylan's unshakable legacy. Dylan, who was once revered as his generation's spokesperson, is now seen in a harsh, unsavory light. Although the famed singer has long been the target of accusations of dishonesty and plagiarism, new accusations cast a darker shadow on the image of a man whose songs once embodied liberation and defiance. Imagine this as a folk hero whose verses are held in high regard for their poetic brilliance, currently facing accusations of being a crafty plagiarist. The claims have reignited a previous discussion, and, with the release of additional evidence, they go to the heart of Dylan's credibility issues. One of the most revered musicians of her time, Joni Mitchell, broke the silence around Bob Dylan in 2010. She accused him of being dishonest and a plagiarist with the weight of her words. A grenade was tossed into a room full of Dylan loyalists, and the statement landed like a thunderclap. As a result of one genius's outrageous accusation of another as an imposter, the whole music industry came to a standstill. Still, the impact was minimal. Fans and critics alike dismissed Mitchell's remarks as nothing more than a jealous rival's rant. Imagine this authenticity, which Dylan lauded, was an elaborate deception. According to Mitchell, the lady who composed some of the most reflective and truthful music of the 20th century. The clamor of devotion to an unapproachable guy, however, overshadowed her voice. An unpleasant reality that was too awkward to face at the moment was that her remarks were disregarded. As more and more proof accumulates, Mitchell's remarks seem more prophetic, like a prophecy no one wanted to believe. Beyond the lyrics, Mitchell's criticism was thorough. She said Dylan's entire persona was based on plagiarized melodies and lines, not simply individual ones. She said he's not genuine in the least. Even his mysterious aura, which contributed to his iconic status, was crafted from the personas of others. Imagine this: the guy who sold us the idea of a nomadic troubadour, the very embodiment of individualism, hiding away, putting together pieces of other artists' life to form his own unique identity. Much more than merely plagiarism, Mitchell's accusation pertained to a much broader scheme of deceit. Dylan wasn't merely stealing songs. She felt he was stealing the soul of his legendary status. His mystery, she said, was all an act, an elaborate mask worn to fool onlookers into thinking he was more than just a collection of borrowed ideas. Still, nobody paid any attention. Who could possibly be deceitful when he spoke so passionately about liberty and truth? Nobody dared to ask the question. Mitchell's claims were both devastating and inevitable, landing like a bombshell of treachery. Her description of Dylan reflected the annoyance of someone who had recognized the reality much before anybody else did. According to her, his rise to fame was not due to his natural brilliance, but rather to his cunning and premeditated use of the unacknowledged efforts of others. She was trying to tell Dylan that his pedestal had always had flaws that were invisible to anyone too enthralled to notice. Mitchell recognized an artist whose genius was not totally his own, but the rest of us failed to see it. However, nobody paid attention to her warnings. Dylan was further elevated to a mythological stature by the cultural machine, not paying attention to the growing body of information. Bitter Mitchell's personal truths were disregarded because they endangered the legacy of a man whose legacy the world was not yet prepared to challenge. This is ironic given that Bitter was lauded for her capacity to see and express emotional truths. In light of what we now know about Bob Dylan, Mitchell's remarks serve as more than just a criticism. Even the concept of him as an isolated genius who rebels against the system is now being questioned. How about a prophet? Or perhaps a timeliness-loving plagiarist? A key voice in this reckoning has been Joni Mitchell, who is frequently eclipsed by Bob Dylan in discussions of 20th century songwriting. Her criticism makes us ask the unsettling question of how much credit Dylan actually deserves for his work. How many more people, who were either disregarded or forgotten, helped him build his empire? A tremendous change has occurred, and now Mitchell is portrayed as more of a Cassandra than a fierce opponent, burdened with the unenviable task of going unnoticed till the very end. She speaks with a more strident voice, demanding attention, as the fissures in Dylan's reputation deepen. Mitchell is finally having his day in court, and it appears that the public's case against Dylan is far from over. Rollin' and Tumblin' is a song by Bob Dylan from his 2006 album Modern Times that has been the subject of some controversy. The melody of the song is almost word for word a cover of a blues song by Hambone Willie Newburn from 1929. There is no denying the resemblance. The only apparent difference is the absence of acknowledgement for the initial author. There are other examples like this. Lyrics and topics on albums like Love and Theft, ironically named, sound disturbingly like those in minor literary works of Jonichi Saga of Japan. Dylan has dismissed the claims as an act of tribute, but his detractors call it thievery in disguise. While Dylan's name is credited as the sole author of Blowin' in the Wind, the anthem that defined a generation, its melody is hauntingly similar to an African-American spiritual. The painful irony that a song that fought for freedom and equality may have relied on an unacknowledged cultural legacy is something that critics have pointed out. It's a moving illustration of how Dylan frequently incorporates unacknowledged influences into his greatest compositions, which begs the question of honesty in songwriting. For his first album, released in 1962, Dylan recorded House of the Rising Sun. Even though it is a traditional folk music, Dylan's rendition sounds much like Dave Van Ronk's arrangement. One of Dylan's Greenwich Village folk scene contemporaries, Van Ronk, later expressed his astonishment and annoyance upon learning that Dylan had recorded the song without asking him for permission. There was purpose to this. After years of singing his version, Dylan included it on his record and essentially claimed ownership of the arrangement, even though Van Ronk had already performed it. Van Ronk felt misled by the deliberate action, which was made by a young artist just starting out. A lot of people think Dylan's It Ain't Me, Babe is his most moving song because of how it deals with breakups. However, there are many who have noticed how it echoes the work of Italian poet Cesare Pivas in both style and subject matter. Concepts like emotional separation, loneliness, and rejection are echoed in Dylan's songs, which are written by Pivas. Although it's common for songwriters to find poetry inspiring, Dylan's detractors contend that he frequently crosses the line into appropriation when he uses poetry. The lack of acknowledgement has only served to heighten the dispute. Dylan is being held responsible for more than just his music. His detractors claim that he has been characterized by opportunism and betrayal in his personal life. Joan Baez, a folk hero who supported Bob Dylan early on in his career, was ignored after she was no longer needed. A similarly troubled marriage, Dylan's to Sarah Lowndes, came to an end in 1977. Accusations of emotional remoteness and infidelity suggest a man who prioritizes his craft before his relationships. Such actions are typical of creative geniuses, but they further complicate Dylan's contentious reputation. There has been criticism of even Dylan's most lauded record, Blood on the Tracks, Tangled Up in Blue, and similar songs, according to critics. Take plot points from novels by Anton Chekhov and F. Scott Fitzgerald. The boundary between homage and plagiarism is once again questioned, notwithstanding Dylan's admission that he draws inspiration from literature. Many also believe that Dylan's troubled marriage to Sarah is responsible for the album's profound emotional depth. According to his detractors, he capitalized on their common past to write songs that millions of people could relate to, all the while ignoring the toll it took on the people directly involved. Many considered Bob Dylan's 2016 Nobel Prize in Literature victory a watershed point in the history of popular music. His legion of devoted followers finally got their fair acknowledgement of his poetic brilliance. When rumors spread that Dylan had plagiarized Herman Melville's Moby Dick for his acceptance speech without giving credit, critics saw it as a tremendous attack on established literary idols. Consider this: a man lauded for his creativity accepts the highest literary award in the world, only to face accusations of plagiarism shortly after. Many saw it as evidence of the very claims that had dogged Dylan for decades, that his career was based on appropriation, although in an artistically garb. Dylan's response to the honor exacerbated the already heated situation. The world wondered for weeks whether his silence was an act of rebellion or just indifference as he rebuffed the Nobel Committee's efforts to reach out to him. Upon receiving the accolade, his reaction was aloof and detached. He described it as incredible yet hard to comprehend. A nonchalant rejection of an award that might have solidified his legacy was viewed by critics as yet another slight. Had he become too haughty to care, or was he too modest? Dylan sent Patti Smith to sing at the Nobel ceremony after he missed it. Her performance of A Hard Rain's A Gonna Fall was so unsteady that she lost her footing and sang the wrong words. Some were moved by her vulnerability, but others saw it as a symbol of the dispute as a whole, a borrowed performance tripping up in a borrowed moment. Those who spoke out for Dylan said that the whole Nobel dispute was based on an exaggeration and a failure to appreciate his work. They say he's brilliant at combining disparate ideas into something bigger. It was the last straw for his critics who saw his career as resting on appropriation. Despite its intended purpose of establishing his legacy, the reward has only served to rekindle doubts about his veracity. How is it possible to praise a man for his creativity when he is accused of plagiarism? It was poetic justice, in the eyes of his detractors, not irony. As a symbol of the paradoxes that have always distinguished Bob Dylan, a man praised as a genius yet shrouded by allegations of theft, the Nobel Prize, once a zenith of achievement, now stands as just that. Rather than being disappointing, these findings are catastrophic for fans. As anthems for a generation looking for truth in a confusing world, Dylan's songs transcended mere music. It is a profound betrayal to find out that any of those facts might have been stolen or borrowed. Imagine this. Charges that tarnished his reputation have rendered him silent, a voice that echoes through generations. Someone who was once a shining example of honesty now views him as the pinnacle of deceit. To those who protect Dylan, his brilliance comes from his knack for combining disparate elements into a whole that exceeds the sum of its parts. A career predicated on deceit, according to his detractors. Bob Dylan's legacy is undeniable, regardless of your stance. This formerly impregnable structure is now precariously balanced. The storm of reckoning has begun, and it doesn't seem like it will ever end.